on various figures here, so I thought we'd go straight to the meeting. Welcome those on Teams. Hope you can hear us again. We're on item 111, Chief Medical Officer update on R&D, please.
Thank you. So I'll take the paper as read, and there's a huge amount to say. I think we've had our lead Andy Lancaster in post for a year, and you can really start to see a different direction. We also have Dr. Tim Gatherell, who's now on board as the medical or clinical lead, who has got a really good background of research and is bringing a whole new dimension to it. They've done very well in trying to increase the portfolio, which, like everywhere else, suffered. We did well with COVID trials, but following COVID, a lot of trials weren't then reopening and weren't eligible, but they're working really, really hard. And really the only area that I think we're trying to support with is around the clinical space. They gave that up during COVID for a good reason, but we haven't really given them any space back. They were looking to see if, like at Furness at RLI, they could deploy a porter cabin, but we've not been able to establish an area where that would be suitable. So that really is the challenge for us more than anything else. But other than that, I'll give it to Fred.
Colleagues, any questions? You?
I've got the question about what support can we and action can we take as a board to try and unlock this issue of space, because in terms of recruitment, having a, I mean, I can speak personally from a medical point of view that having a really active research agenda is incredibly attractive to some of the, perhaps what we would say, some of the higher flyers that we've got, particularly as we look at, as we're going to link to the university, potentially, say the new hospital in 5 to 10 years time next to the university. I was just thinking that when I was looking at the potential plans and everything about where things could possibly be. And I thought this is just should be something we should be able to sort, because I think it's actually pretty important to us, particularly as we're then looking at moving from soft 4 to actually soft 2, and those sorts of things become more aspirational and I just think that's really important.
So what I would say to you, so I don't disagree with what you say. What I would say is I could at a whim add another 15 things that are equally as emotive or important to others onto that list. And the reason we need a new hospital is we need a new hospital. So with the space we've got, then we've created various kind of formalised kind of space utilisation groups that kind of risk score developments and try and allocate space, the finite space based on levels of risk. And then yes, you're expecting mainly clinical facing services get first dibs on the space. There is probably a more we've had, I guess, there's discussions in principle with our partners, local authority and universities around space sharing, but and my sense is I've never got to a real granular level of detail, so there may be more for us to do in taking that to the next level of detail. But I think if I'm on, I probably get a communication every week that tells me we should do that thing because it's really important, and we should use the space for that. But there's a complexity to it.
It just feels, if I read the paper correctly, there might be things going on in corridors that shouldn't go on in corridors. Is that a correct reading of the paper? It said that, or waiting area, it said that was it an RLI part of the service? We've got some space attached to more in a waiting area.
Yeah, I think it's not quite a waiting area. It's sort of a clinical area within a space that isn't designated to them that they can use.
Right.
So agree, we're between a rock and a hard place.
You've got frequent foot traffic through to pharmacy for staff and visitors in the area where there's.
We couldn't. They haven't thought about whether or not we could look to university because it's clinical consultations that they're doing. They couldn't do that on another site because of the potential emergency cover needed if somebody became well or something. So
or some drift into operations. Yeah. It's an issue really for the crew and the chief medical officer to work on. There are lots of like you, Scott, excuse me, I get emails asking all the time, can we have space? Can we have this? And why is this space empty after 5 o'clock? And, you know, there's a lot of calls from community in particular, or patient support groups. So we haven't got enough space for everything. That's the reality. I think at best we just ask the COO, the Chief Medical Officer, to keep considering that. But we've got to be careful that as a board we don't go into, because next month we could go, well, there's a patient respiratory group, they want space, and then the month after that we'll get another group saying, well, they want space. I think we need to leave it under the domain of the executives unless there is an impact on patient safety or quality of care.
So I just want to highlight, found it, the paragraph that just raised concerns for me, which I think falls into that thing where it says, and it may not, and I'll pass this back to the executive. There appears to be no progress in providing a dedicated space. The only space we've been given is a waiting area outside pharmacy, which affords no privacy or confidential ALT for research participants with frequent foot traffic through to pharmacy for staff and visitors. Now I read that and I get concerned. That's all that's where my concern is, specific concern has come from.
I'll clarify that, but to be fair, they have taken it through all the correct processes with the estates and the groups, etc., etc. So it's going through all the right things.
So just assure us that it's gone through process.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to bring in Sakthi, then Sarah, then Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I also had similar sentiments reading the just words on the paper. But I wonder if we as a board can understand how research active our trust is, slightly put a different perspective compared to, other trusts that are in the place where we are aspiring to be, and linking it with the wider economic opportunities over and above attracting staff as a driver. I wonder whether that kind of perspective could help the organization broaden its perspectives on research and development and innovation in its fullest sense. And I suspect there will be more opportunities if you look at space in the community. Thank you.
So,
I think that's a good recommendation, Sakthi, but I might offer that may fit better in a board strategic conversation agenda rather than go away and come back with some proposals, because I suspect there'll be colleagues with good skills, experience and contributory role to play in the development of that narrative here at the board. So I know we're going to be making recommendations to change the cycle and the profile of the board in due course to allow more space for that. So, Chair, it's okay to make a recommendation that the research strategy, research innovation ambition could be a board development discussion.
Yeah. Just let us know how board members help with links with universities, etc. Sarah?
That probably covers two things really. So the first one, I agree with Sakthi. What I didn't get a sense of coming through the paper was that strategic intent around our R&D. But what I did get was that sense that a reset has happened and we're moving forward. So I thought that was really positive actually. So I just agree and would be very, happy to be part of that discussion. And then I think the second thing was to just make that direct link. I know that colleagues have just met with people at the university, at Lancaster University, and of course you'll be meeting with colleagues at other universities as well. But I know that there is an appetite for a more strategic level discussion around research and development activity, and happy to support that as part of partnership working.
Okay, thank you. Karen?
Oh, thank you, and absolutely appreciate this is a clinical research and development paper. But two questions really is how far does R&D also really embrace community and colleagues, community driven vision? It's often very medically led in an acute environment. So what opportunities are there to really embrace that hugely important part of our organisation? And secondly, I'm aware that it's a lot of what could sit under the research and development umbrella, a lot happening within the people portfolio, actually some really interesting developments that have happened within our finance portfolio. that we haven't necessarily thought about as possible research and development opportunities to actually really understand that better and share and publicise that. I just wonder what opportunities there are for a broader take on R&D.
And if I can add to that, actually, we are starting to identify opportunities where research opportunities through, for example, Lancaster University, but again, completely recognise that other universities will also be exploring these. We're starting to look at how that might support some of our wider thinking and wider work. So we've been discussing with Scott around a bid around maths and using maths in a more analytical, applied way to support things like system working and various things. So I agree. I think there are opportunities to think more widely than clinical R&D.
Okay. Jane?
So in terms of the sort of breadth of the portfolios that they look at, they sort of horizon scan anything that's coming out. So if there's something that then is applicable to our kind of trust, they will then scope out whether or not that is feasible. So it may be that there is nothing sort of out there that has come up for community, but if there's a different source, I'm sure Andy would be keen to hear about it. Agree about that. We just need to remember this is a clinical research team, so we've got clinicians who then would be using skills to do other kinds of research, but we would need to have a broader think about what that research function looked like and delivered.
I think what's happened, I think, is you produced a report one area of your responsibilities, which is specifically around clinical R&D. I think someone's around the table go, there are wider R&Ds. So we come back to the paper that's in front of us, that's clinical R&D. But if you could give some thoughts around how we could have a discussion in another board around the wider R&D.
So I think the new education structure that Caroline Rock and Dan West have been working on will sort of have that wider remit of any of that really. So we just need to look where that goes.
Strategies, exactly.
We had Chris and I had a meeting with Lancaster last week about our undergraduate education, and actually sort of not dissimilar things came up around that. So.
I think in the strategic discussion that Aaron's quite healthy with in a different setting, there were, and I think they still, perhaps less so, a number of very research active practices in the area, and I think COVID had the same impact on them. And I'm not sure that necessarily my old practice was very research active and COVID hit, and it's certainly, from what I can gather, not picked up to the level, and it might be. If we're thinking more about place and thinking strategic, and that's clinical research, think about how we can perhaps join some of that together. Some of that may have been lost again with the CCG disappearing and it going off to the ICB level. So I think that's worth putting into the pot, which is the wider clinical, and that fits with the community.
Probably need to revisit this because I know I formed a group called the Clinical Academy, which was self-interested people who were not self-interested. And it's split into two. One was a project group, one was R&D. That the Clinical Academy has now been absorbed into the ICB under their HR portfolio. But Sarah O'Brien now chairs the R&D Clinical Academy subcommittee, and David Levy chairs the Projects Clinical Academy subcommittee, and I chair the Clinical Academy, but it's now part of the ICB. And in relation to that, Lancaster University has very kindly agreed to host a dinner, hopefully at the end of November, for system leaders. So it'll be the chief execs of the PCB, plus the ICB and other relevant players. And the whole idea of that is all the universities will be there. So Edge Hill, UCLan, Cumbria, hosted by Lancaster. Two focuses for the dinner: people development and future skills, and secondly, wider R&D issues, how we can all work together. So something might come out of that. So this is a rolling thing, really. So we just need to come back to it.
Just to help, I think, because there's a lot in everything that's just been said. So if we're going to do a session at one of our strategic agenda items on the board. Research in its wider context. So we're looking at holding a session, which is what's the current status of research activity here and where has this grown from and to, so we can take a baseline assessment. I'm hearing that there's an appetite to have a conversation about why would research innovation be important to us? So income generation, practical application of research to problems that we have in our trust or place, recruitment and retention of good caliber individuals that want to work in this system. And we'll have to include then a conversation about trust, place and ICB, because there's lots of activity in here. So just to help, you know, Jane, myself and others shape a couple of hours with the leadership team. So we'll bring Tim and Kaz and others into the room, but we'll have a proper conversation about that, because this feels like an untapped area of potential. And we talk about it quite a lot, but I'm not quite sure we've got all of the board support around it. So if that's helpful for me to play back that, actually, we'll set up a session like that.
If it helps as well, thinking not soft 2 or soft 1 now, but CQC outstanding. At the criteria, if you read the national guidelines for CQC, outstanding is strength and depth in R&D. One of the criteria, so we should have that as part of our ambition. So if it helps, it might help with the soft 2 entry strategic discussions to start increasing our R&D profile. On that note, Jane, thank you. You set up a really good debate there. Are people happy to note and accept the paper?
Or punch up one of the two.
We move on then to the next item, CQC report and update from our Chief Nursing Officer, item 112. Tabitha, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the report as read because the Chief Exec in our last board touched on our CQC report and that it's now out there. So this report is just a summary of the findings from the CQC inspection that happened in April and May 2023. And it also contains an update in relation to the CQC new methodology that's going to come in February 2024. So what this report does, it outlines the findings and the background and the inspection recommendations. We received 10 must do's and 11 should do's, and they're all enclosed in the report. So this is just to give assurance that we have got an action plan to deal with this. All the care groups are looking at what are their must do's and should do's, and work is happening around that. The board will be updated around the new methodology which is coming. We've got 34 quality statements that are going to replace the key lines of inquiry known as the CLOEs. The new methodology is going to also put quality first, which is part of our strategic vision. And it's also going to focus on addressing health inequalities within population. And there is a new area of focus within the CQC methodology, which is a focus on environmental sustainability. And as a board, we will need to see how we develop that. So I'll take any questions. It's just here for assurance and to note those changes and recommendations and findings. To also say it was discussed at quality committee in detail. Thank you.
So,
Just a reflection and an answer. So because we have an examiner's report from the inspection having sat an old exam, and we now have an action log designed to address those recommendations, but we're going to be assessed about how well we've delivered against those under a new exam board, the 34 key questions.
Yeah.
So we just need to make sure, and I know we will, but the way that we approach the evidence and the supportive work for improvement now has to be competent to make a dovetail to the new inspection regime.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is, the second point I was going to make is when we receive the soft 2 improvement trajectory and the actions we need to take forward to achieve the soft 2 rating, which I know Chris and the team are working on with the NHS England regional team. The CQC responses are going to form part of that. So we have quite a complex, potentially multi-exam board thing to sit in about 12 months' time. Some of it will be through the NOF, through the English NHS England framework. and some of it will be the new CQC inspection regime with an old CQC report. So I think it would be helpful, probably offline outside of a formal board, just to walk through with colleagues how that might work, because we'll all have an ambition share in the next cycle of reviews to achieve CQC overall good to get to soft 2. And we need to make sure that we're sitting the right exam with the right evidence and approach. So I'll ask Tabitha and Chris in particular on the NOF and the CQC just to do some work to come to a future board as we get those improvement trajectories to be clear as to how the evidence and that improvement on the 2 new regimes.
Aaron?
Forgive me if this was already addressed at quality, Hugh, but just in connection with the CQC recommendations, we heard earlier from Heather that none of those that related to maternity were ones that we were unaware of. Everything was already on the risk register, was already being addressed. Does that apply to the whole set of recommendations? It feels like a really important point that there was nothing that was a surprise and everything was already being addressed. I'm just not clear if that applied to the whole set of recommendations that we see, or just the maternity ones.
I think it's overall across the board. I think it's things that we know, things that we're working on. I don't think there were any surprises in terms of what came. Yeah.
No, the board had overview of the niche recommendations in
Yeah.
previous CQCs, which were the 197 that we had. What is the process for assurance oversight of these recommendations across the assurance?
Okay, so the should do and must do's will be monitored through the Good governance structure, and then the oversight of all of it will come through quality committee.
So they do 3A's things to your board. And when we do the strategy for a soft 2 entry, there will be a requirement for another CQC visit. So we're looking at spring 25 as our entry into soft 2, rough approximate
I think
date.
we need to do the work chair on the criteria and then work back from the.
This will have to feed into that.
Yeah.
I'll bring in Sarah then yourself. Sarah?
I was just going to say on the assurance piece as well, I'm still receiving invites to the support and review panels are still taking place actually around these actions and being completed. So I'm still receiving invitations to those. So as non-exec directors, we have an opportunity to drop into some of these discussions to see how they're being addressed and to be assured. And I've focused on medicine previously, but given that most of these relate to, well, nearly all of them must-dos relate to maternity, I think I'm going to try and drop into women's and children's, but just to comment that those are still taking place for our assurance that we can drop into.
Yeah, we confirmed that at Quality Committee that approach was going to continue.
Yeah.
And it struck me at the committee, and again when I reread the papers for today, was that contrast this to the last CQC report we got when we got all of those enormous list of must-dos and should-dos, and it just was almost overwhelming. This was a list of, as you said, no surprise, but what has struck me with the approach that's been taken this time is that the people looking at the report have then gone in and said, well, what are the other things that they're saying that we could do better at and we should strengthen and such like, and they've now become actions as well, which I think is a real step forward from where we were say 18 months ago. So I think that's I think I just remember those lists that we used to get through quality each month. It's 100. When you added all the three major sets of work that were going on, 100 sets of actions. I think, and now people looking at a report and saying, well, it's actually suggesting we get stronger on this and we maintain that and such like, rather than featuring as a recommendation, but picking those out. And it's a bit like the approach that was taken with the Letby letter. Well, let's look a bit more widely. And I think that suggests there is an indication of a cultural change, a real change in the way we start to look at it. So positive and congratulations to the people involved doing it.
So summarise then, we've got the 21 must and should do's. We now have an action plan to address those that go through the care group, scrutinised by the quality. 3As will bring it to the board. The NEDs are also invited to the various scrutiny groups so we can triangulate that way. And it will also feed into our SOC 2 strategy and action plan. Colleagues, are you happy to note the report? Yeah, thank you. We'll move on then. Thank you, Tabitha. UHMB Sustainability Green Plan.
Thanks, Chair. So it's a bit of an odd paper to bring to board in some ways, in that from paragraphs 5 through 25, there's lots and lots of detail again. On the flip side, it's difficult to describe the progress against the 9 priorities in the abstract. So they're there really as a flavour of some of the things that the team's done. So that's the first point. And the second one is, I would expect one of the questions will be what's the trajectory and what's the resourcing, and that's the issue for us. Is this is done largely as part of the day job. There's no bespoke resourcing for us in the green and sustainable space. So I know one of the 4 tenets of the memorandum of understanding with Lancaster University is green and sustainable, isn't it? So I think there may be something for us to again to start to get into some of the detail of what that looks like, and share some brain power. The table you see on page 217 is really what those were this year's priorities against, of course, the green strategy that the board signed off in 2022. So I get with that kind of structural basis, Chair, the details in the paper is here for noting. Happy to take any questions.
Oh, actually, Alex.
Yeah, and the trajectory bit is one of the things that I was going to pick up, because in our green plan, I can't see anywhere that actually takes us through a clear understanding of what we would need to do to achieve the carbon neutrality, and then for us to be able to do the assessment about how affordable is that, because obviously we have got the financial constraints that we have, and I do think there is something about understanding how achievable delivery of carbon footprint, never mind carbon footprint pluses, in the financial context. So I do think there's some real validity in getting to the understanding of what is the trajectory and are we actually going to be able to get anywhere close to that given the finances. The other bit that feels a little bit so a lot of this is around the estate, which I absolutely get, but there's a huge issue for us around clinical practice and clinical delivery of things. So anaesthetic gases, single-use items, inhalers are kind of the 3 big things from a perspective of clinical practice. And the Royal College of Surgeons did a report last year around kind of sustainability in surgery. So I suppose I'm asking the question, do we have medical and clinical leadership really committed to kind of helping drive forward the clinical changes that are needed?
Sort of asked in a roundabout way, sorry, just put it in a roundabout way, the same question to Scott, because if I remember correctly, the Royal College of Anaesthetists says that each department has to have an anaesthetic gases lead.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that we've got that. And I saw something the other day about they're about to ban desflurane or something, which is one of the bigger ones. But I suspect there will be areas where we've got focus on it, but I don't know that we've married it up to this. They're going through, quite rightly, the clinical pathways changes. So we probably haven't joined it all together, and we certainly won't have maximised the opportunities. But there was an interesting critical care conference on Monday at which anaesthetic about using appropriate IPC, not using gloves for everything, etc., was all there. And as an ICB, we said, yeah, that's something we want to do. So we'll have to think how we try and knit it all together, I think.
I'm taking from what you said, Ali, just a bit of a warning to the board that there are financial issues related to green issues that we need to be aware that might have an impact one way or the other, either on green issues or on the finance.
It's just the point that Tabitha was making about the new CQC inspection regime placing some stock in sustainability and environmental kind of improvement and just making sure that any future iterations were just mindful of that, so we can put ourselves in a good spot for the future review.
Well, this report details the sustainability green plan, as you say, on a page with the terms of reference and the realistic ambitions, as you call it, within the existing resources. So we're asked to note the paper. Colleagues have to note the paper. Scott, thank you. Okay, we'll move on then. Last closing admin stuff, the attendance monitoring register you've got, scheduled business you've got, check with the company secretary, no urgent business.
None that I've been alerted to, Mike.
I'll just check with colleagues. Are you happy that you've covered everything you wish to this morning? No assurance issues that you wish to raise related or outside of the agenda? No. Then I'll close the meeting at 11:31 and seek guidance from the company secretary now on how we move into our private board, which is 12:45, and whether we need to meet earlier to help people with the planning of their day.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So got quite a busy agenda this afternoon. Might be helpful if we could reconvene private board at say 12:30, just to give it a bit more headspace for the afternoon if people are agreeable.
Got 12:30 or 12:50. I'm thinking the earlier the better.
If the,
What if these,
You know, for a break.
Yeah.
12:15.
is there a cafe house there?
colleagues on Teams, are you happy to reconvene at 12:15?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Okay, now close this meeting. Private board commences at.
I think some people have got things over lunchtime, possibly. That might be
Well,
difficult.
come and see me as the chair. We'll reconvene at 12:15. We'll try and jiggle the agenda so that people.